Downwell is an infinite runner where you have to tactfully navigate your way down a well by landing on enemies or shooting them with your gun boots. It's a great game, and also a great fit for the theme of Ludum Dare 48, Deeper and Deeper. In this video I'll walk you through the development process of my Downwell-Style infinite runner, Line, and explain some of the problems and decisions I faced along the way. I usually spend the first night of any jam brainstorming and mulling over an idea. For this one, I quickly settled on a Downwell-style game, but I decided to omit any attacks or ways to interact with the enemies. I did this because I wanted to focus on movement as a means of evasion. The main idea was to get the player to protect their oxygen line lagging behind them by varying their speed at which they travel down the level. By traveling quickly, you avoid a lot of enemies, but your line is also taut and exposed as it tries to keep pace. By slowing down or even jumping, you pull your line with you, keeping it out of harm's way. As you'll see shortly, I didn't quite achieve what I originally set out to create, but I think the end result makes for an interesting concept with some room for improvements. The first decision I made on Saturday morning was that for the sake of time, I was going to use the built-in Unity physics system. It was also the first decision I reversed because the Unity system is not to be trusted. Instead, I pulled in a raycast-based character controller from another jam game of mine and started making heavy modifications to switch it from a top-down character controller to a platforming one. I also added wall sliding in order to give the player a way to quickly slow down without landing on a platform. After that was done, I wanted to test the thing out, so I figured it was best to work on the level generation. Without getting too technical, the level generator pulls from a pool of pre-made level chunks that include things like walls, enemy spawners, spikes, and decor. When the player falls a certain amount, it adds a new chunk to the level below the player and removes the oldest one from above them. I decided to remove the old chunks for performance reasons, because each chunk is made of individual tiles and contains dozens of colliders. This would probably start to bog things down if left unchecked. Next, I got started on rope physics, which proved to be the most time-consuming technical problem I faced over the course of this jam. I initially wanted to build this using the Unity physics system, but it was really jittery when you had more than 4 or so rope segments in a moving rope. This was probably due to user error, but with the Unity physics system being what it is, I didn't feel that it was worth the time to coax it into working. Once I decided I was okay with abandoning a physics-based rope, I got to work implementing a rope using Verlet integration. The script I used for this comes from a really handy 2D rope tutorial by Jasony, which I'll leave a link to in the description. Basically, the rope is made up of individual points with a defined start and end position. As the start and end joint move around, the middle points use Verlet integration to pick a position between their neighboring segments to move to. This creates a silky smooth rope without all the performance overhead or randomness of a physically simulated rope. Finally, I spent the last hours of the day on character art. I wanted something that was cute but not too complicated so it would be easy to animate. Making the character squarish was also a consideration here, since my character controller only supports a box-shaped collider. Once the whole thing was done, I decided to have a bit of a laugh and give the character shorts. It felt absurd at the time, but I wound up keeping it because I felt that showing some skin grounded the character a bit and made it feel less like a robot, which fit the design I was going for. With the character art out of the way from last night, I was free to start animating. I set up a handful of simple animations for the character and quickly got those working in-game. Next, I started working on the enemy designs. I knew I wanted something to fly around to try and cut your tether, so a swordfish seemed like a good fit. I also wanted an enemy that didn't outright kill you, but that worked in tandem with the other hazards in the level to make you vulnerable. With that in mind, I made a turtle that stuns you and throws you backwards when you hit it. This can put your oxygen line in harm's way if you're not well positioned. I did the art for the enemies in the same style as the diver, but importantly, I decided to make their eyes completely black, with just tiny white pupils. This gave them a sort of hollow feeling that, combined with the otherwise cutesy look, made them slightly unnerving. It was around this time that I got some unexpected help from a buddy of mine who offered to work on an original composition for the game. We had a few calls to discuss the mood and tone, and he went off to get started on what would become a pretty baller piano piece. The next thing I wanted to do was get the fish AI working, so I spent a ton of time getting that up and running. In the end, I had a system set up such that the fish would line up for a shot on you, wind up, and launch themselves towards your tether. They kept swiping your tether when getting in position though, so I gave them 2 ground rules. First, they can't try to cross over your tether to get the shot. Instead, they'll prefer a position on the same side of your character as they are. Second, they'll try to stay a safe distance away from your tether until attacking. Outside of that, they constantly reevaluate their desired position as you move around, so once they're in position, they lock in their target and try to ram it. The last major thing I did on Sunday was to start customizing the rope script to allow it to be cut by the swordfish. This, along with some basic menus, marked the first time the player could be killed, so the game at this point was starting to take shape. I took a day off work on Monday to work on this, so I had plenty of time to implement the turtle AI, which just walks back and forth on a platform and attacks the player if they get too close. I also got started on the audio solution for the game. After a handful of jams where I wanted to implement dynamic audio but we had to cut it for time concerns, I finally scrounged up the time to get it working. Basically, the audio I got back from my sound guy was split into 7 tracks that all layer on top of one another. As you progress in the game, it starts to fade in more and more audio tracks until it finally has every track playing at around 850 meters. He also recorded some gravel sounds from around his house to use for footsteps and wall slides. Lastly, my girlfriend was kind enough to go digging through some of the old audio assets I had laying around and found some great sound effects to use for the enemies and character. Everything was coming together nicely, but I started to notice that the game lacked any real depth. The difficulty wasn't there for me, and neither was that original concept of varying speeds and managing the tether. So I added some spikes to make the turtles more of a threat and to mix up the challenge a bit. I'm really glad I did this too, because I feel that a static hazard pairs really nicely with the stuns from the turtles. I felt that I was done about an hour in advance of the submission deadline, so from there I just got everything uploaded and started taking screenshots to use in the game page. I think this jam was a really good design exercise for me. I went in with the idea of a game where the player varies their speed to protect their oxygen line from various threats, but when I didn't feel like it was going to plan, I had to improvise by adding spikes and tweaking the enemy AI just a bit. I still have this image in my head of the player needing to jump to pull their oxygen line up to avoid a swordfish from below, but I don't think I was too far off that in the end. Another day or so of tweaks probably would have allowed me to get there. Another idea that I really liked but that got cut for time was to make the level get darker as you descend. I wanted to have lights in the form of bioluminescent enemies and coral, while the overall dimness of the level made picking out threats slightly more difficult. I think this would be a fairly easy thing to implement, so if I ever come back to this project, that'll probably be one of the first things to be added. That and head tracking. As soon as I saw what it looked like for the fish to move its head around, I wanted it to track the player. So in conclusion, I wanted to give a big thank you to everyone who's taken the time to play and rate Line so far. The feedback I've received has been really helpful, and I've noticed a lot more interesting ideas about how to improve the game being tossed around this time than in most jams. Some of the ideas in the comments are really smart, and if I ever come back to this, I'll definitely try to implement them. If you want to see more content from me, I don't do much on YouTube, but maybe that'll change if this gets some traction. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter @Moralette for unrelated project updates and the occasional flame war with A&W. Thanks for watching.